Hello, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Ernest Atto from Business Review Webinars, and I will be your host. It is our pleasure to have Prism ID with us today, who will be discussing Mind the Gap. Labeling experts share the 7 steps of building a global labeling system and reducing the validation effort. Today's guest speakers are Steve Ellison at Prism ID, Chris Heckert at Network Packaging Partners, and Phil Dre at Prism ID. I would like to welcome you to our webinar platform On24. This webinar is browser-based, so if you disconnect, click the link you received via email to rejoin the session. All of the icons along the bottom of your screen are interactive widgets that we have on offer today, so please interact with them all throughout the session. You can ask questions using the Q&A widget or by using the questions box. We will try and get through as many of your questions as we can once the presentation has concluded. Please use the help widget if you experience any technical difficulties or require any more assistance. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome Chris, Phil, Steve. Steve, over to you now.
Hi. Right then, let's get started. Hello everyone and welcome to Prism ID's first webinar in a series of 7 webinars which will be presented by experts from the industry and cover the following topics. We'll be covering planning a project, resourcing a project, successful implementation, global applications, language management, architecture and resilience, and the last one will be validation. There are many challenges associated with labeling, and these webinars are designed to assist you to leverage the best out of your labeling activity within the supply chain. 1 second there, just going to advance the slide a little bit for you. There we go, next slide for you. Product recalls caused by labeling defects, industry's ever-changing compliance, label rework, just-in-time printing demands, local language requirements, and intense label inspection are just a few of the problems faced by the industry on a daily basis. Labeling not only drives patient safety, but it is also a key element in product distribution and business revenue. Many businesses are not yet leveraging the true potential of their labeling system, and so are not realizing the downstream benefits of improved efficiency, cost and time savings, productivity gains, watertight compliance, and most importantly, the elimination of labeling errors. Today, you will learn more about how to plan the implementation of a global labeling system, and also how to reduce the validation efforts by using your supplier's key strengths. So that's today's webinar. Our next live webinars will be in a couple of months' time, and you will receive a registration email. 2 more experts will present alongside Prism ID. These will be Kevin Bergert, who will talk about digital transformations and Internet of Things and its impact on how we do business in the life science industry. And the second speaker is Bill Cooley, who will talk about the integration and single source of the truth in life science. So, this series of webinars, which is hosted by Prism ID, will help you choose the right solutions and through them reduce risk, achieve zero defect labeling with full traceability, increase efficiency, overcome technical challenges, improve the compliance, avoid costly product recalls, and assist with consolidation and expansion. So, just introduce the speakers. But please reach out to Prism if you need assistance. Do not wait to the end of all the webinars for help. We're happy to engage at any time. Prism 360 solution is a powerful, comprehensive, scalable, and validatable labeling solution which offers complete label integrity from data management to design and approval through to label production and inspection, which meets the strictest compliance requirements, including those from the FDA and the EU. So that's who we are and what we do. I'll now introduce you to the 2 speakers. They are Chris Heckert, Director of Client Solutions from Network Packaging Partners, And we have Phil Dre, who is a Senior Test and Validation Engineer from Prism ID. So there are the introductions. I'll keep quiet now and hand over to Chris. Here you go, Chris.
Thank you, Steve. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're attending. My name is Chris Heckert. I'm the Director of Client Solutions with Network Packaging Partners. Network Packaging Partners is a talent network of packaging engineering, global labeling system, and regulatory professionals who apply their unique expertise to project-based work for our clients. Our tiered approach to staffing bundles varying levels of talent to provide clients with a customized solution and access to the breadth of our talent. Specifically related to global labeling systems, the team at NPP is comprised of industry experts who have implemented labeling systems for numerous companies. This vast amount of hands-on experience allows our clients to avoid an expensive education by allowing NPP to leverage our collective knowledge from the 14 implementations of global labeling systems over the past 8 years. During our time today, I'll share with you an overview on how to implement a global labeling system. You could break it down different ways, but I'm going to break it down into 7 basic steps to GLS implementation. You need to validate the labeling system to your network. You need to understand which sites and which SKUs are in scope, and, as importantly, which sites and SKUs are not in scope. You need to identify, plan, and qualify your infrastructure of network needs, computers, printers, and barcode verifiers. You need to evaluate your label data for correctness, completeness, and standardization. You need to migrate the data from the legacy system to your new GLS. You need to confirm and document that you did everything correctly. And you need to turn the system on in a way that eliminates the possibility of operator error or operations interruption. Let me state the obvious. Implementing a GLS is a big project with major quality implications. It is imperative that you have a project leader and a dedicated implementation team. Virtually every department in your company will be identified as a stakeholder in this project. This project should have monthly updates with a steering committee of upper management due to the cost and quality impact. If no one's told you yet, based on man hours, implementation of a GLS will cost approximately 2 to 3 times the cost of the labeling software itself. Phil Dre is going to speak after me, and he is going to speak on validation. So I'll only say this. Leverage Prism's systems validation. Work with your solution provider to write your user requirement specification. They likely know more about what the label system needs to do than you do at this point. By using the existing software, your gap analysis between the Prism validation and what you'll need to validate will be minimal. This simplifies not only initial validation, but all subsequent validations needed due to software upgrades and changes to your operating environment. In other words, if you need to customize the software to support your current process, you likely have an inefficient or deficient process. You should strongly consider revising your process to match the software. Your process will be better and standardized across the platform, and you will avoid adding cost and unnecessary complexity to the labeling system. If I could go back in time, I would take the customization out of my first labeling software that we fought for so we wouldn't have to revise our labeling procedures. In retrospect, it turned out that our processes were inefficient and the customization created all kinds of validation headaches. And then, to remind us of our bad decision, we paid maintenance fees on that customization every year thereafter. Anyway, now that your system is all validated, you're ready to commence the implementation project. And like any project, the first thing you define is your scope. While this sounds easy and straightforward, scoping your labeling project can get complicated. Your scope likely includes all of your design control products labeled at your site. But if you're in labeling, you know that's just a fraction of your products. Should it include your design control parts packaged and labeled at third-party sites? Should it include parts that you package and label but do not have design control for? Do you label other parts that are not medical devices? Do you print labels for in-process parts? Do you produce specials or customs or patient-specific parts? Are they in scope? Does your ERP system handle these parts in a way that allows for them to be in scope? Should you include parts at different sites? Should you include parts that can be made in more than one location? You have to understand the implications of your scope. If you are centralizing labels that were once done remotely, do you understand the creation, revision, and approval process that has to be transferred? If you are adding a site that does not share the same ERP system, do you switch it over? Do you validate the GLS to another network? Do you centralize your labeling services? If you are allowing suppliers access to your labeling system, do you have the appropriate security in place? Do you have the processes defined? If you are labeling product that is not your own design controls, do you have a workflow that ensures that the design control holder has final approval? While you're establishing what's going in the labeling system, you must also figure out how the labeling system is going to operate. Your labeling system should be owned by the group of people who manage the data and are responsible for delivering approved labels to the production floor. But it should be administered by information technology or whatever product is responsible for your ERP system. The IT group will be able to identify the network interfaces to access the information necessary for the label. This will include the database with all the static information, for example, the trade name, the G10, the size, the component name, the international symbols, etc. It is also likely that the software will have to interface with the system that creates work orders for production in order to get the lot numbers and the quantity of labels for those lots. And if your products have shelf life, there will have to be an algorithm that calculates the expiry date. In terms of servers, you may want to consider a single master server or a master server with slave servers set up regionally. Your database administrator will have technical input into the design of the label content database. Based on latency, the time on the system which can affect label printing speed, there may be a requirement for a flat DB, or based on other efficiencies, there may be a desire for relational databases. For the peripheral systems, you should identify the printers you're going to use and confirm that the print drivers are available and compatible with your GLS. You need to qualify the printers per your quality system requirements for equipment qualifications. You'll also need to qualify the PCs or laptops that you're using to link the GLS and the printer. And if you're using GS1 in order to be UDI compliant, you will have to qualify your barcode verifiers. It's during this infrastructure planning that you will write your work instructions for controlling the creation, revision, and approving of labels. You will need to have a label creation approval process in place before you begin populating the database and creating formats. You could describe this creation approval process in a data migration plan, or you create the actual procedures for making labels. Either way, the documentation should be managed and approved per your document control procedures. Once you understand your scope and the label system is integrated to your network, it's almost time to populate your database with label content. But first, the #1 schedule killer of any label system implementation project: your data. You will not believe how messy your label data has become. You have label data for obsolete parts. You have labels with old logos, obsolete brands, acquired company identification, different colors. You have old TrueType fonts that won't print correctly unless those fonts are loaded on the PC that your printer is attached to. You have labels in all caps because 25 years ago you used a dot matrix printer that couldn't print lowercase letters. You have labels with no patent numbers when they should have patent numbers. You have patent numbers when you shouldn't have patent numbers. Some parts in a family have registered trademarks. Others in the same family print TM. Due to many reasons, you have some product descriptions in English only, some in 5 languages, some in 7, some in 10, 12, 18, 22, 23, and these multiple languages are not always the same sets of languages. Additionally, due to uneven interpretation of the regulations, you've got country of origin designations all over the place. You've got international symbols both with and without English descriptions. And you've somehow managed to abbreviate length 3 different ways, circumference 4 different ways, and diameter 5 different ways on your labels. When you share this information with your stakeholders and the other departments, your organization will determine that this is the time to clean up the data. And this cleanup will take you 3 times longer than you expect, as so many different departments will have to weigh in on the decisions. Regulatory will have to decide on content changes, brand for product families, QA/RA for abbreviations, marketing for font issues, legal for trademark and patent revisions. And as you decide and define and organize and standardize these elements, make sure you document these decisions and subsequent changes. It is vitally important for your implementation team to document and manage each and every change to legacy data. If you lose control of these changes, you will have lost the link to your source data. And if you've lost the link to your approved source data, you've lost everything. Once all these changes are documented in your change management system, you can begin moving the data from the legacy system into your new GLS. In a perfect world, since you've established your database structure, you simply have to move the data from your old database into your new database, being careful to arrange the data into the format of the new database. However, it's possible in the real world, your legacy label system does not use a database, but a comma-delimited text string, or MS Word files, or PDFs. You still have to move the data, but it is anything but simple. Your IT department may have someone that can crack your current code into something more manageable, but it is likely that some data will need to be hand-keyed. Your spidey senses are tingling. This is indeed the point in the project where mislabels are born. At this point, you're most likely creating Excel spreadsheets. It is imperative that the data in these spreadsheets be evaluated and checked and confirmed before they are loaded into the GLS. The rules of a global labeling system require comments and rationales for any changing data. If you have to clean up data after it's been loaded into the GLS, your quality system will most likely require that you manage and document those changes even beyond what you have detailed in your data migration plan. Data migration also includes the creation of the label formats. Depending on your system, your internal policies and procedures, you may have a handful of formats, or you may have thousands of formats. There are pros and cons to each approach. It's easier and safer to make mass changes with fewer formats, but you can be very precise on individual labels if you have multiple formats. This is a decision that should be made based on your business needs, the amount of label revisions you anticipate making, any label validations you need to leverage, any CAPAs that affect label formatting, industry standards for label formatting, and so on. After you've successfully loaded the label content data into the new GLS database, it's time to verify that you did so correctly. Your quality department will be very interested in this aspect of the GLS implementation. They will, unbidden, remind you that any label error is a misbranded or adulterated label, and any misbranded or adulterated label must be recalled. No pressure. Again, in a perfect world, you can use machine vision to confirm that the labels that print out of the new system have the same label content as the legacy labels. This is a great way to document that new labels match the legacy labels, and is easy if you have machine vision and you haven't made any changes between the legacy labels and the new labels. However, if you don't have a machine vision system, or you've made any label changes, things become a bit more manual. While there are several ways to visually check to see if the new labels have the same content that the legacy labels have, a very basic method is one-over-one checking. This would be one person comparing all attributes and label content of the new label against the legacy label. And if all matched to the legacy label, the labels would be signed off and passed on to another person who would perform the same check. Is it perfect? No. It is, however, with the right people, an acceptable method. In order to increase our confidence in this method, we actually tested people with sample label pairs. 80% of the pairs were matches and 20% had discrepancies. We only used label verifiers who scored 100% on the test. After this 1-over-1 check, copies of both the legacy and GLS labels, which are signed and dated as approved by 2 individuals, are scanned and attached to the appropriate change notice to document the activity. Upon approval of this change notice, the labels are allowed to go live. Step 7, go live. You've come this far, you're almost done, but you've got a full lap to go. This will be a big deal to you and your implementation team, but it cannot be a big deal to the rest of the company. Your GLS will be considered a success if no one notices that it just went live. This will be the event where management and the end users will judge the system. Go live is when the curtain rises and everyone sees this global labeling system for the first time. In most cases, go live plans are shaped by circumstance. There may be an edict or a CAPA requiring a total switchover by a specific date, but many times it may be easier and prudent to ease into the new system. There are several methods to switch over gradually. It may be easy to switch products being labeled from a specific printer to the new system, while the legacy system is on the other printers. This gives you a backup plan in case an unexpected development surfaces with the new system. By rolling out the new system in a limited way, the monitoring and the collateral downtime is minimized. Once the system is up and running for a period of time, more printers can be switched over until the legacy system can be retired. Circumstances may suggest that the switch to a new system be done by product family, by product group, by package type, by packaging line, or by building. Just be aware that simultaneously using 2 systems requires very good communication, prompt training, well understood procedures, and of course, rock solid change management activities. Any method that involves dual databases should be avoided at all costs. And don't let personal preference dictate go-live activities on the fly. The go-live plan and schedule should be published prior to any switchover. Ideally, the plan should be part of the data management plan, but can be formalized later as long as it's documented and is attached to the change notice for go-live. Once the system is up and running, ownership of the GLS should be transferred from the implementation team to the administrator of the system. Depending on your structure, the system administrator could be in IT, doc control, production, or really anywhere else. What's important is that the GLS goes from a development project to an operation system in the manner of a manufacturing transfer. Roles and responsibilities should be predetermined and a formal transfer document should be signed so when the system has a hiccup, the appropriate person is notified and action is taken. Now, this has been quite a bit of information, but that's because implementing a labeling system is a very significant project. Taking care of the details from validation to go live will result in a very powerful system that can not only provide correct labeling for your product, but also do so much more. It can help you manage and control your worldwide inventory. It can allow you to delay labeling until shipment when you know the country-specific labeling requirements. It can help you coordinate and control rework activities. It can enable you to use configuration management to show different manufacturing sites or countries of origin based on where the product is made. With our staff of professionals, network packaging partners can help you implement your GLS and assist you in realizing the true power of a global labeling system. Please send along any questions you may have. There will be a question and answer session after Phil's presentation. Thank you for your time and attention. I now pass the presentation over to Mr. Phil Dre.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. Thank you, Chris, for your presentation. I'm Phil Dray and the Senior Test and Validation Engineer at Prism ID. And during this short presentation, we will be looking at the principles behind successfully leveraging your supplier to potentially reduce your validation effort. The time and effort to perform computer systems software validation should not be underestimated. What starts as a sound approach with planned activities to deliver to a committed date soon becomes a date that will be missed. The industry is always seeking to find the least burdensome approach to validation, and with implementing the key concept of leveraging supplier involvement from the GAMP5 guideline, along with a risk-based validation, this least burdensome approach can be realized. So, what does it mean to us? Firstly, we as a supplier need to establish what validation really means in relation to computer services validation. And this can be summed up as proof by objective evidence that a system requirements have been met against a functional user requirement specification. This statement is closely aligned with the current GMP guidelines and the GAMP regulatory obligations. So depending on the size and complexity of the computer system software being deployed, this task will consume a great proportion of the time allocated to validation activities. Not to mention if you have the right resources available to execute the task. It also assumes quality assurance and good document practice validation. And validation does not only show requirements to be met through objective evidence, but also meeting regulatory obligations. But also building quality through the validation cycle. And this can be achieved through that good document practice. And not forgetting maintaining that state of control. As with all validation activities, achieving a state of validation to meet the regulatory obligations is not the only outcome. Consideration also needs to be focused on maintaining that state of control through change management to ensure traceability. So in designing test and validation documents, we should be asking, can this document be used more than once? We will expend a large amount of time authoring test and validation documents, and therefore it makes sense to design documents that can be used time and time again. Surely this is more efficient, whether it's your own documents or the documents that you can leverage from your supplier. It all starts with a user requirement specification, as well as following the process of defining clearly and precisely what the system is required to do. These requirements should be driven by the business process needs. The user requirement specification should also address the following: quality critical requirements, requirements that address applicable GXP regulations, and in particular should highlight those requirements that are critical to patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. Lifecycle requirements, any specific requirements it may impact the supplier's development lifecycle. This could include the following: development requirements, for example, coding standards, procedures for product management, test and validation process, factory acceptance testing, documentation the supplier is expected to provide, for example, functional specifications, test documents, traceability matrix. Once you have your requirements, you can start to look at what your supplier can offer to help you make your validation process more efficient. These items will have been identified through the audit process. If your supplier has a mature software development lifecycle and test cycle, any of these documents can be leveraged and should be. After all, if your supplier has gone to the trouble and expense of producing these documents, it may mean that you do not have to. So some of the SDLC documents that may be available to you could include the following: test plans. These will detail the testing approach for the project, detailing what is to be tested, and if what's not, right through the risks and contingencies for product during this test cycle. Product functional specifications, a document which describes the functions of the application and how they are to be implemented. Test documents. These test documents will look to establish the functions described in the functional specification operate correctly. This is really proving what you say you can actually do. Traceability matrices. This is an essential document and will trace all the testing requirements back to the functional specification. Other documents may also be available to you, such as generic operational qualifications and also test summary reports. This also could be called a validation summary report. You can also leverage documents from the supplier's quality policies and procedures, especially if the audit has revealed that this is a mature and recognised quality process. These can be used as supplementary evidence, and in the event of an audit, it shows that the audit process has looked for objective evidence in the key deliverable areas of the supplier's business. It's not only documents that can be leveraged. Services can also be leveraged, especially software installation and training services. These can be used to complement your delivery teams and thus moving towards a least burdensome approach to validation. As part of your supplier audit, the company structure and training records would have been examined. These will identify key personnel within the organisation which can be used to assist with your delivery and go-live preparations. This could include subject matter experts in training, validation and software installation. It's worth looking at all the aspects of your supplier to establish what can be leveraged to assist in making the delivery process up to go live as smooth as possible. We have now completed the user requirements and have established what can be leveraged from the supplier. The next task is to construct the validation master plan. A key element in this case is the validation strategy. In the section, the supplier assessment, the audit should be included along with any conclusions. This could be, for example, based upon the audit performed on a particular date, the supplier's quality management system has been found to be mature with supporting policies and processes. These policies and processes have been confirmed by objective evidence seen at the time of the audit, and it is therefore the conclusion that the supplier's quality management system's policies and delivery models are satisfactory. Within the plan, reference should be made to the documents, services or subject matter experts you're going to leverage, along with their responsibilities. By including these in the validation master plan, you now have a defendable position at a regulatory audit on leveraging items from your supplier. So, what's next? To be able to have a defendable rationale on leveraging your supplier in terms of documentation or as a subject matter expert, the starting point is to perform a supplier audit. So, why audit? Well, as we know, regulated organisations require a high level of confidence that the computer systems will meet their technical and regulatory requirements. These organisations may also wish to leverage the knowledge, experience and, more importantly, the documentation from the supplier. To leverage this successfully, a good rationale is required to show an auditor with objective evidence on how you've established that your supplier is fit for purpose. And the process goes something like this. First of all, establish the need for audit. A decision should be taken on the need for an audit based upon the results of an internal risk assessment. This risk assessment takes into account novelty and complexity and categorization of the software solution. For example, a risk assessment on the software determined as a Category 4 COTS solution. Conduct the audit, post or on site. Now, there's a significant cost to both regulated companies and suppliers associated with conducting audits at the supplier's premise. This includes travel to the supplier, the number of days of effort for both parties to support the audit. So a postal audit may be more appropriate. A postal audit can provide a good understanding of the supplier's systems. It may also provide an indication on how you intend supplier approaches the management of quality, and this may be confirmed by a site visit if necessary. The value of a postal audit is greatly enhanced when all the documentation is provided by the supplier. The postal audit then becomes closer to a desktop version of the on-site audit, and only limited value will be obtained from a postal audit when no supporting documentation is provided. A successful audit outcome will assist the regulated organisation providing a rationale on why they have found it acceptable to leverage suppliers' documentation and subject matter experts as part of their validation process. It is important that objective evidence can be referenced when putting together this rationale, this being one of the successful outcomes of the audit. So what are the major process areas to be examined during the audit to give a sound and defendable platform to produce such a rationale? So, does your supplier have a recognised mature quality process of which they can demonstrate they are in control of? Is there evidence that a recognised software development lifecycle process, again with objective evidence? Is there a high-level test strategy? Is there evidence that a structured test process is used along with evidence? Are good document standards being employed? This is recognised as GDP. This is a good indicator that your proposed supplier is in control of their document practices and at a fundamental level understands the good document practices used within the life sciences industry. Is there sufficient independence between document authors and document reviewers? This would include, for example, functional specifications and test documents. This also includes if those authoring and reviewing are appropriately qualified. This can include exam qualifications or industry-gained experience. A good document system shall be able to show and verify traceability from requirements through to testing. Are the key personnel involved in the delivery of the solution appropriately trained? This can be seen through training records. This is not an exhaustive list, but these areas are a good starting point. Remember, the audit will need to collect evidence so that you can defend your leveraging rationale in the event of a regulatory audit. We have now created the user requirements, performed the audit, identified the items which can be leveraged from the supplier, and created the validation master plan. You now need to establish what validation activities need to be performed by yourself. So welcome to the gap analysis. This process can be relatively simple. Firstly, look at the validation requirements that need to be satisfied as detailed in your validation master plan. The plan should contain all the requirements needed to satisfy a defendable regulatory obligation. Now look at your supplier documentation and establish what you can use to defend that position. Remember that your supplier would have performed exhaustive testing and that this evidence can be used. Remember, if your supplier has performed functional testing, then you may not have to and can concentrate on the business case test called out in the validation master plan. So what's left? Once you've performed the gap analysis, you should be able to establish what can be leveraged from your supplier to assist in meeting the requirements laid out in the validation master plan. Remember, this is not only documentation, but can also be services using supplier subject matter experts assisting in your validation process. What will be left or not covered in the validation master plan will be the test items you will need to perform. These should now just be the business case test described in your val plan, which the supplier cannot test. This should just now be a number of small business cases or pertinent process tests called out. If the supplier has functionally tested against a functional specification and there is sufficient objective evidence to support this, then through a risk-based approach, there may be no need for you to repeat this testing. The result of this is a reduced validation cycle. There may be a need to issue software releases or patches for defects identified through a critical process. Therefore, regulated companies should develop an approach to patch and upgrade through good control management that provides criteria for determining the urgency for applying the patch, considers the risk of applying the patch, considers the risk and appropriate mitigation to maintain a state of regulatory compliance, and generates change records that describe what testing was performed. It is normal that these items are described in the validation master plan. This plan not only describes how to meet an initial state of control and regulatory compliance, but also describes how to maintain a state of control with objective evidence, if a change to the system is required. There should be a number of documents that you should be able to leverage from your supplier. These will include a release report, which should detail the changes in the release or patch. From this, a gap analysis can be performed using this information and the validation master plan to establish the risk and the amount of test to the control state of the system and the amount of testing that needs to be performed. Patch or release test documents. These documents could contain a functional testing of the patch or release with an amount of regression testing to show that the existing functionality has not been adulterated. This could be used in the gap analysis to determine what testing should be performed by the regulated company. For example, the functional testing has been performed by the supplier with the relevant objective evidence. Therefore, from a risk-based approach, business case testing as described in the validation master plan to establish that the new functionality operates as described and that the existing processes have not been adulterated. There are potential benefits to leveraging your supplier. The main benefit is to reduce your validation effort, either through documentation or the validation test cycle. After all, if you have audited your supplier and found their quality processes acceptable, and they have performed a large amount of functional testing and have produced acceptable documentation with objective evidence, why should you repeat the process? It should be possible to reduce your validation effort by performing the gap analysis and establishing what tests you need to perform. Hopefully, this will only be the business case test as described in the validation master plan. These are probably the most relevant part of the test process. The process of leveraging also engages your supplier earlier in the process rather than at the end when it's too late. This early engagement builds an effective partnership for present and future validation activities. After all, the supplier is the subject matter expert in their application delivery. This partnership will also assist in maintaining an ongoing state of control, as future patches and release can be discussed with the supplier to establish the best and most efficient methods to deploy, test and validate to meet your regulatory obligations. So, in summary, author the user requirement specification, audit your supplier, create the validation master plan, perform the gap analysis, perform the testing analysis, create the summary report, and finally maintain an ongoing state of control. By applying this simple process to leveraging your supplier, you can reap the benefits and reduce your validation activities. Thank you for your time, and I'd now like to hand you back to our host.
Thank you very much, Phil. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. So that just leaves me to thank Steve, Chris, and Phil for what was a great presentation, and thanks to Prism ID for sponsoring this session. To the attendees, you will receive an email tomorrow telling you how you can access the on-demand version of this webinar, or you can access this through our website, which is www.business-review-webinars.com. Please continue to ask questions, vote in polls, interact with the widgets as the on-demand version remains interactive. We look forward to sharing further webinars with you, so please keep an eye out on our website and follow us on Twitter at BRWebinars for daily updates. And join our LinkedIn group, Business Review Webinars. Thank you once again, and I hope you all have a great day.